We're going to look at how to say only in Japanese in this video tutorial. There are two ways to say it. One way is quite easy, and we'll start with that, but the second way is a little bit challenging. The easy word is dake, only. Let's think of a situation where we might use this word. For example, you go into a shop and you'd like to know whether they have any bread. And so you ask, "Pan ga arimasu ka?" Do you have any bread? Unfortunately, they do not. Iie, no. They only have cake. Keiki dake arimasu. Keiki dake arimasu. We only have cake. You can see that dake replaces the ga, and it's very simple to use this construction. So you can replace particles wa, ga, or o with dake, although you don't have to, which means that you can add dake to those three particles. However, for beginners, I would recommend that you don't. Simply replace those three particles. It's so much easier to do that. All other particles, you can add dake either before or after those particles, but that's getting a little advanced and you probably won't need that. And finally, dake has no overtones of any kind of judgment. It's simply an objective fact. That is the extent of what we have. Next we have shika. That's the other way of saying only, but this is not used when stating an objective fact. This has an overtone of a judgment, and it suggests that the amount that you have is not as much as you perhaps would like. Let's have a look how it's used. First of all, we'll go back to that same scenario. We walk into a shop. We're after bread. We say, "Pan ga arimasu ka?" Do you have any bread? Just as in the previous sentence. Iie, no, they do not. They only have cake. And this time we have to express it differently. So we begin with keiki, and then we're going to use the alternative word for only, shika. So keiki, shika. Now the difficult part of using shika is that you have to use it with a negative verb. So instead of saying keiki shika arimasu, you have to say keiki shika arimasen. And it's more like saying, rather than we only have something, it's like we don't have anything else but cake. It still means only, but it's expressed in a negative way. Of course, this meaning is the same as we only have cake. But the point to remember is that it's always used with a negative verb, even though it equates to a positive meaning. Shika. You replace the particles wa, ga, or o with shika. That's the only alternative. You cannot add shika to those particles, so you must replace them, unlike dake. With all other particles, you add shika after the particle, so that's very similar to dake, where you can add it after or before. And finally, unlike dake, shika is always used with a negative verb and emphasizes the negative. Let's try using the two different forms of only to make a different sentence. See if we can make the sentence, "I only like cake," starting with dake. Keiki dake suki desu. Keiki dake suki desu. Quite straightforward. Now let's try it with shika. Still the same sentence, I only like cake. Keiki shika suki. Now to finish off, we have to change desu to the negative form, and you could either be formal and say dewa arimasen, so keiki shika suki dewa arimasen, or go one step down in formality, keiki shika suki dewa nai desu, or you could use the everyday polite form janai desu. Keiki shika suki janai desu. I don't like anything but cake. In other words, I only like cake. Let's try one last sentence. I only eat cake. And first of all, we'll see if we can use dake. So I need keiki dake tabemasu. Very straightforward. Instead of object particle o, keiki o tabemasu, I eat cake, you simply replace the o with dake. Keiki dake tabemasu. I only eat cake. What about with shika? This one, remember, we've got to use with a negative verb. So, keiki shika tabemasen. Keiki shika tabemasen. I do not eat anything but cake. In other words, I only eat cake. So hopefully you now know how to use dake and shika, the two ways of saying only, even though one is easy and the other is a little bit tricky. Ganbatte!